be liar. You want to help to mind your family. You want to help your man financially. But nowadays it's really very hard to get a job as a girl in Trinidad. You're looking now to find something to do. You meet a boss man who promised to help you. But when the man lay down the condition, it's nothing else but humiliation. They want to see a whole anatomy. They want to see where your doctor never see. They want to do what your husband never do. Still you will know if that scamp will hire you. Well, it is all this humiliation to get a job these days as a woman. Brother, they could keep their money, my honey, and die with my dignity. Not at all. Be bombarded. Oh, yeah, yeah. Ba-da-ba-dum, be-bum-de-dum-de-day, ba-ba-da-bye. Some of them done pack up already, yet they sit down, waiting like Mappy, using the power of the cash and position, waiting to abuse and exploit every woman. To get the work you have to go to bed with he. Become his slave, his second wife and deputy. And as the next woman come on the line, he start to tell you you ain't good, you can't whine. They want to see you in some fancy pose. Want to see how you look without your clothes. They want you cock up like a bloody acrobat. The wife at home, they can't ask she to do that. So before I had to lick down somebody, or cause I let the police come for me, tell them they could keep their money, I go keep my honey and die with my dignity. I'm born with it. Looking for work, you might bounce up a fellow who might be looking quite handsome and macho. You tell yourself you want to work with him, so you decide you go try a ratchet fee. But when you're done, it's then you get to know he wife leave him and gone long time ago. With all the cash he have, he's a failure. The man ain't nothing but a blinking sukuya. He want to feel up your navel and your breast. He want to see if you are lower on your chest. The things he want to do you with his hand, like if he's searching to find the promised land. I am a woman, I don't make any style. Before I slap you and you die of heart attack. Glasses, keep your money. Keep my honey and die with my dignity. It have a lot of women just like me who might be not well off financially. You need a job and you really need it bad. A man decide to help you must feel glad. But if you value yourself as a woman, you will demand respect from the vagabond. Stand up to them, let them know the truth. It's what you want to end up blinking prostitute. You have a mole on your back, they want to see. They want to see if you have marks on your belly. They want to know how much man you had before, and if you're strong enough to take any more. I have my pride and I have my ambition. I want to hold my head up high as a woman. So tell them they could keep their money, I will keep my honey and die with my dignity.
Oh, yes. Singing Sandra. I say no more. The calypso speaks for itself. Good evening, good night, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Big show tonight. Big show tonight. We have the opposition leader of the People's National Congress, Aubrey Norton, is going to be here with us tonight. But I couldn't resist playing that song by Singing Sandra, Die With My Dignity. It speaks for itself. After all, we are talking about Guyana. We're talking about Guyana. Singing Sandra. Wherever you're joining us from, this is the place to be at 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock Guyana time every day. Good evening to all of you. Audrey, yes, you're right. Proper song for the times in Guyana when there is so much alleged rape and sodomy. You know why I like Guyanese and West Indian? I like being because you all bright bad. I ain't say nothing. I just play the calypso, and you all know what time of day it is, what time of night it is. Yes, Brenda. Yes, Brenda, I forgot to say, I said leader of the People's National Congress, leader of the opposition, leader of the APNU. He's here and he's ready. As you all know, we've been threatening for some weeks to bring him on, and he is here. Today, overnight, as you know, the Ministry of Education wrote to the Ministry of Labor asking for conciliation. So as far as I know, the teachers union, they were locked in discussions today at the ministry. And I saw earlier where the president of the teachers union said that they made their initial interventions, and the ministry had to go back to get instructions from their superior. But the strike is on. The government has moved to consider. They should have gone there a long time ago, but you know how it goes. You know how it goes. But the strike is still on. This is the third day of the strike. The first 2 days, the teachers stayed at home. And today is the third day of the strike. We understand the police has broken its silence, or the police have broken their silence on the recent accusations against the minister, the former minister, Mr. Dharam Lal. The police had not been saying anything since last week. The Guyana Press Association, oh, I love them today. They stepped in and do what the media should always be doing. And they call on the police to say something. The police came out and they said that the matter has been reported to them. It's a serious matter and blah, 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 blah. We are waiting. These are serious times in Ghana. Please share the live. Please share the live. We had a ball last night. West Indies Cricket 101. We had quite a panel last night and talking about the state of West Indies cricket. And you know, when you talk about cricket, it's just as if you're talking about politics, because our cricket, our politics, our music, our culture, they're all tied up together. And we're ready. So I think we're ready to get going now. Yes, it's about that time. Let me bring in our guest for tonight. Good evening, Aubrey Norton, opposition leader of the PNC, leader of APNU. Welcome to Politics 101. You've been missing in action from this program for a long time.
Good evening. Thanks for having me. And if I'm missing in action, it's only because I wasn't invited. I've always made it clear that I'm disposed to be on your program.
Thank you very much, and that is true. That is true. You know, when we bring certain guests on, we don't want them to be on every 2 mornings, so that when they come, they have a lot to talk about. Aubrey, let's get started immediately. Political leaders are usually um, they're usually uh, um, they're usually in the hot seat all the time. All the time. Political leaders in Guyana, in any part of the world, they're always in the hot seat. And political leaders are often evaluated across time, which I think is a mistake. I think whenever we're talking about political leaders, we have to evaluate political leaders in the context of the time that they are leading. And that is the approach I want to take here tonight. You took over the leadership of the PNC, the leadership of the opposition in 2021 December. And it's now what, 2.5 years. What would you say? What would you say is the particularity of the time that you are leading the party and in effect leading the opposition? In effect, I'm saying when one thinks about Aubrey Norton and the time that he has been leading, how would you describe this time? What is peculiar about this time? What is it about this time that Burnham didn't have to deal with, or Hoy didn't have to deal with, or Corbyn didn't have to deal with, or Granger didn't have to deal with? Put it in context for us, please.
The first thing I would say about that is that none of them, I think, took over after an elections in which the leader and president was involved, and then he dropped off the scene. Didn't address the Guyanese people on the situation. That resulted in a situation where a lot of our supporters were like, oh, we're not going to support the APNU, AFC because of that. So the first task I had to undertake was to really ground the party back in our people. And that took considerable work to go into the villages, to go into the communities and engage persons. That, I think, was the first significant difference between many of the other leaders coming. Then I came at a time after the international community was up against the APNU after the 2020 elections. And so one of the things I had to do was to develop a strategy to re-engage the international community and allow the international community to understand our perception, where we are, and where we intend to take Guyana. And I think we were able to do that successfully. Most of you would recall before I became leader, a Secretary of State visited Guyana and didn't even engage the APNU AFC. However, having done our work at the international level, when the next Secretary of State came, he engaged, and we were able to engage and carry our position. So I'm saying the second thing was, I really took over in a situation where the international community was not engaging us and they weren't on our side. So that is one other situation. The next situation, I think all the other political leaders took over with a list of parliamentarians that they determined. I took over inheriting a list of parliamentarians who were determined by my predecessor. And so again, one sees a significant difference to Corbyn, to Desmond Hoyt, to David Granger. And I thought that also. Then when I became leader of the party, we had many situations to deal with that I think had to be dealt with. One of which is to reorganize and regalvanize the party. And I think we have been able to do that. Most of you who followed would recall that we didn't used to have regular press conferences. We weren't in the media as we should. And so we had to do that. And then the coalition was not as strong when I took over. For instance, the WPA had left the coalition. And one of the tasks I had to undertake was to engage the WPA so that we can begin to develop the relationship so that we can come back together as a coalition. And then you had the AFC talking about going in their own direction. And so again, I had to engage. And having engaged, we kind of work out a modus vivendi so that we can continue, even though the different groups will do their own political work. I also believe that the national situation had changed. I became leader when the PPP had oil money at their disposal. And therefore, resources in the country is not a problem because the resources exist. Therefore, you have to strategize on how you deal with the PPP while they have all these resources at their disposal. I remember, for instance, many making noise, oh, you cannot beat the PPP in Georgetown, Linden, and New Amsterdam with the kind of resources that they had. Of course, as leader, I held a different view. I knew we had to take them on, and we strategized and managed to maintain our strongholds. So this whole fact that the PPP has at their disposal a war chest that they can use, including bribing Guyanese, that is significantly different than any other leader would have inherited. And then when people compare, some people try to compare my era with the Granger era. When Granger became leader and ran in the election, the opposition had the majority. So when people say, oh, the opposition was effective, the opposition was effectively the government because they had the majority. And that when a budget came and they didn't like it, they had the majority to do what they want. I did not come in that situation. I came in the situation where there is wealth, money at the disposal of the PPP, where the government has the majority. And even though it should have been a one-seat majority, we have seen the small party that got a seat lean in the direction of the People's Progressive Party. And so that also constituted. Now, there has been a principle over the years that in formulating your list after the election, you tend to have a balance between experience and the newcomers. We had a preponderance of newcomers. I thought we would have learned from what happened in 1992. In 1992, when the government changed, the finance minister was not part of parliament. And so the PPP ran away with all its propaganda because the person in the engine room of the finances weren't there. When Carl Greenwich came, that situation changed because he knew, particularly on the debt, he took them on, and after a time they stopped talking about the debt because he was on top of it. Now, in the present situation, you have very few, especially from the PNC side, persons who were ministers, and therefore you are at a disadvantage. And more importantly, even with the few ministers you had, they did not place them in a way that they shadowed the ministers of the ministry they were in. In fact, it is only at the last budget I saw to realign so that people who served in the ministry as minister shadow the minister, because they will know what is happening or what was happening in the ministry and be in a position to respond. And so we are a little better aligned now, but there isn't the kind of experience that should have been after I emerged as new opposition leader. Then we are operating in a technological era in which across the country, but more importantly, Georgetown, there were CCTV cameras placed there to deal with crime. But the People's Progressive Party are now using the CCTV cameras to see who was involved in political activities and then bring charges against them. The classic case is the Quindon Bacchus protests, in which the PPP went to the cameras and then just charged about like 12 or 13 people falsely with terrorism and all kinds of garbage. And so that instilled a certain amount of fear in persons who would have protested, etc. And then you have a situation where the PPP is able to use the newfound wealth at the disposal and paying a lot of persons who might not be doing anything $40,000 to work for 10 days. And then the PPP says to them, if we see you in any political activity, we will deal with you. And so what that did is ensure a couple thousand persons who would have normally come to front in a protest, etc., saying, look, we support you, but we're in this difficult situation. We must understand that the PPP impoverishes the support base, then puts out this 40,000, etc., and create the kind of environment. To add to that, but I won't say this one that I'm going to add now is specific to my leadership, but it has been intensified. That is the use of fear and domination and control to control political activities. Plus, you see an accentuation of the politicization of the Ghana police force to the point where they had the Ghana police force trumping up charges against all or the key persons who were involved. So what the PPP has done basically is to change the environment in which people operate. And that in itself now demands that you have different strategies. The strategies, as General Secretary of the PNC, I was the forefront of political protests. I saw some saying, without any proper analysis of the situation, that we need to be protesting more, etc. Well, protest forms can change, but street protests in this environment, I don't think will give us the results. We have to strategize. And our key strategy has to be regaining political power so that we can serve the people of Guyana. And so I would say it is in that kind of contextual framework I became leader of the party. Add to that, the PPP ostracizing anyone who even appears to be supportive of the PNC. I want to give you a classic case. There's a young man that does bingos, and we engage him to say, look, we want a bingo to be done on behalf of the PNC. He said he doesn't have any problem. We pay him whatever, we do it. By the time he returned to Everest, where he had already paid for holding a bingo, he was told, collect his money and go. They didn't say to him, well, you're doing a bingo for the PNC, so you can't do it for us. But everything they did suggests that that is the direction they are going. So one of the significant difference is the People's Progressive Party has now exercised so much control that even contractors that were linked to the PNC are afraid to even appear to be supported. In that context, I've had to strategize and come up with new ways and approaches to mobilizing money for the party. Now, you could mobilize money easily, but the characters you will go to will compromise you politically. And so we needed a strategy that allowed us to mobilize resources while not at the same time compromising the party and the leadership of the party. Because if you do that, what will happen when you get power is that you are obligated to persons who don't have the interests of our constituency at heart, and then you will be accused of not doing what should be done for the communities. And so in that context, we had to strategize and come up with some new approaches to leading the party and ensuring we achieve our objectives. And I think we have been doing that relatively successfully.
Aubrey Norton, opposition leader, leader of the PNC, leader of the APNU, here tonight. And I would like to welcome all of you. All are out in big numbers, understandably so. The opposition leader is here. Aubrey, I have to press you on the question of protest. The PPP strategy when it has been in opposition has always been to use its influence in the sugar sector, its influence in the rice sector, the agriculture sector, and use that to undermine the government of the day. The PNC, on the other hand, when it has been in opposition, whether you go back to the 1957-64 period, you go back to the Hoyt-Norton period following the 1992 election, the PNC has always used street protests as a primary form of protest. And no doubt, because of that, people have been critical of your stewardship in saying that you have not employed a street protest enough, and people still believe that that is what the PPP respond to. You said that you said in your opening remarks here that you don't think that street protests would give the results that one wants. But how do you deal with the fact that part of the political praxis of the PNC has been street protests, and that our people are politically, culturally grounded in the notion of street protest? How do you explain to them that you can be up against a vicious regime, as you have described, and not have street protests?
All right, let's do the analysis. You pointed out that the PPP used the sugar workers, the rice industry. That's a fact. You pointed out that we were more with the public service, the bauxite unions, etc. Now, one of the significant changes the government made in the public service is to put most people on contracts. So if you act like you did in 1997 to about 2008, you're easily fired. You're not a public servant, there is no protection. That point needs to be underscored. while there are a lot of people calling themselves trade unionists, many of the trade unions that were vibrant at the time are no longer vibrant. I'm not blaming them for that, but you don't have a vibrant bauxite union like you had. You no longer have a vibrant public service union like you had. And so the vulnerabilities created in the sector that you drew your support from are many. You have to now analyze the situation and come up with some alternatives in terms of protestation that will allow you to achieve your objectives. And I would be remiss if I don't say this. With all the protests we had in 1997, we still ended up at the bargaining table and at elections. Because don't forget, the world has changed. Protests are no longer leading to regime change in the way that it used to for a plethora of reasons. Now, we will protest, but the form of protest has to change. The kind of protest that we're accustomed to, whether we like it or not, the government has done everything to cripple it. It might be useful to remember how the PPP protested. The sugarcane burned and you didn't know who it was except you know it was the PPP. And your new form of protest must achieve certain objectives without exposing your support base to the viciousness of the PPP. I want to say this to you. When we're preparing for the local government elections, people will come to me and say, look, I get put on the PPP list. I am not a PPP. I am APNU. But I have to get contracts. I have to mind my children. I have to do X, Y, and Z. And so there were many of them who I saw names appearing, but they had spoken to me before to say their livelihood was virtually compromised if they didn't go in that direction. And like I said, it is easy to be overseas and all around and talking about, oh, let us have street protests, let us do that. I mean, I say this to you. When the Quindon Bacchus protest occurred, well, you would recall because I was speaking with you directly, I did warn of some of the things that actually happened. But what was worse was when these young men were charged. Many of the people who were calling for a protest abandoned them. It is we here who had to find the resources to bail them so that they are free people now. I'm saying to you, and I would say to the constituency, there are different forms of protest that we can use without compromising yourself. You know, I had an interesting meeting with UC Koyano, and he made a point to me that stuck in my head since then. I was talking to him and I said, you know, as a politician, and he said, stop. I was never a politician. I will never be a politician. I always saw myself as an activist and an organizer. What we need at this stage is organization and activism within the present context of what exists, which must include a lot of exposure of what the PPP is doing. Because from me visiting PPP strongholds, etc., it is evident that a lot of people in the PPP support base do not agree with what they're doing. They are not benefiting from the oil and gas resources. And so they themselves are emerging as formidable challenges against the People's Progressive Party. We have to ask ourselves the question, would street protests enhance our position to get government and to serve the people of this country? Or would it give the PPP the opportunity to do some of the things they want to do, to rally back their forces and to make the APNU AFC the object of their criticism, and they achieve their objectives? I think we need protests, but the form of protests should differ from the period we're talking about. And so street protests, in my opinion, is one form of protest. But let's assume you do the work and it builds up to become a street protest. It doesn't mean you will forego it. What you will do is organize yourself to ensure that those protests don't turn around and be a problem for us. Let me go back to 1997. In 1997, the street protests occurred. And we knew who the PPP had identified that used to penetrate the protests. And then you had Ravi Dev writing about the assault of Indians, etc. And all of us who led the protests were described as thugs. And mind you, not only by the PPP, the middle class, some middle class persons who were supportive of us had that description of our supporters. We, and myself as leader, we have to be sensible and develop the forms of struggle that will allow us to achieve our objective. I saw someone or some of them out there talking about, oh, we ain't protesting, we in this. But if you look, you don't see them in any protests. Protests, you know, David, you have to have skills. You have to know about protests. Just plying your mouth and saying you're going to protest is not it. It is based on concrete work in all the villages, and then you activate. Now, what do I say to our supporters? Continue to organize, continue to be on the ground. Let us continue to expose, keep organizing in the villages, and we will determine the form of protest as the conditions demand. That is what I would say.
That is the point. Certainly, this issue is divided the support base because, like I said, a protest has been very much part of the practice of your party. But you have made the point that this is a new era and it demands new approaches. Do you feel, as you go around the country, because I know you go around the country, I mean, the media, we don't have the kind of media in Guyana that covers wherever the opposition leader goes. They tend to cover where the president and so on goes. And I know you've been in communities. You know, somebody was telling me you were in a community, Dairy Cross on the West Bank, and that will never see the light of day in any of the newspapers. So people would not know that you're going around the community day in, day out. If you go to Region 1, as you did the last time, they'll cover that. But these small meetings in the community, when you go around the community, I am sure you have to confront this issue of protest. Do you get the sense that your approach is getting through to the base?
The majority of people I engage tend to believe that we shouldn't go down the road. But there is always a group who you have to explain to, who would want you to become involved in street protests. And when you ask the hard questions to them, they come around to accept that we have to change our strategy, we have to change our approach. Now, if you're dealing in a country that has the kind of resources Guyana now has, you want to be more involved in the politics of exposure the politics of agitating against the government within the confines of what they call conventional politics. You need a politics to put out your alternative program to the government. We have been talking about a people-centered development strategy. We have been pointing out to people that Guyana is worse under the PPP than it was under the APNU. And many people accept that. They tell you we used to get water 24/7. They tell you that you didn't get as much blackouts, etc. Now, the PPP in itself blunders every day. I believe that the PPP is in a crisis that they can't get out of. Their corruption, their incompetence, and the only people who could get the PPP out of the crisis that they're in is us if we make the mistakes and do the things that they are baiting us to do, so that they can become involved in the nefarious politics. I remember in one protest, out of the blue, some young men turn up and start looting, doing all kinds of things. And then you got to the bottom of it, they were paid agents of the PPP. And they have the money to do it even better now. So we have got to engage the people of Ghana, talk with them, and to understand the culture in the society. The PPP stronghold, even that swung the swing votes that you got in 2015, didn't come as a result of protests. They came out as a result of being fed up with the PPP, the corruption, etc., and the feeling that the alternative government is not going to be a government that is lawless, etc. And all of those variables have got to be considered. And I am going into many, some of the critical issues to be solved by our support base. Protests can't solve. It can help contribute to weakening the PPP. I just came from Plainville. And now I'm walking around and they stop and say, where's Plainville? Now there's this area in Sophia where the planes touching down at Ogle pass over them like every minute. So all the people that occupy that stretch call the area Plainville. To solve their problems, you really have to win an election. Because one of the big problems they face is the non-regularization of their lands. And that is across the country. You can go, I go into many communities, and a lot of people believe it is only the Afro-Guyanese. I've gone to Indo-Guyanese community. I went to Blackbush Polder, in which a man who said, look, I have supported the PPP. We've been trying for years to get piece of land in this area and get it regularized. And PPP bigwigs come and bring people from overseas, etc., etc., and they get the land, and we're left without. So one has to analyze the extant political situation and develop strategies to ensure that we educate the Guyanese people. We need to say to them, when the election comes, they can't know how you vote, and you have to organize to get them to vote and to do the things we need done. But we must bear in mind, many of the problems to be solved are problems that you need a caring government, a government with a people-centered program to deal with it. Because you can protest, and you should observe the PPP's attitude to protest. And they know why they're doing it. What happened at Mocha is not accident. You know how long we had asked some of the legal people to deal with the Mocha issue? and they didn't. Now, the PPP made a deliberate decision that they are going to destroy those people. I made a point in the last press statement, right in line with where they move people saying the road will pass. They now give out a piece of land and a man is fencing it to do something there. We have got to be very, very sensible as we struggle against the People's Progressive Party. And struggle doesn't take one form. You have to adapt to the situation to achieve your objectives, or else efficacy will be lost.
Aubrey, I'm glad you mentioned the Moko issue, because that's an issue that was the government attitude led to some very graphic pictures, women being all around in the mud and being knelt upon by police, and then their homes being kicked down, their cattle and other livestock being destroyed. The image of your supporters being brutalized on the street, and the seeming incapacity of the opposition to stop it. How do you respond to that? Now, I hear you on protest, and I think I would say half of the audience hears you on protest that is not properly executed. But the image of your supporters being spat upon, their homes being broken down, their businesses being broken down by the government. Every day the government is, in a sense, graphically taking advantage of your supporters, and the seeming incapacity of the opposition to even deter them. Talk to that issue.
I don't think it was solely the incapacity. Let me comment first on Mocha.
Okay.
And then on the last one, which is Peters Hall area.
Yes.
In fairness to Joe Harmon, I was CEO or executive director in the office. Since then, we had engaged our lawyers to take action. And they never did. They gave all kinds of excuses. And so we did not use the legal machinery. When I became leader, I began to push. A lot of people were talking now, only talking Karagam mouth. They know full well that this was a thing we decided very early. You have to take legal action against it, or else people become vulnerable and the PPP will do just what they did. I turn now to Eccles, or, well, I don't know, sure, Peters Hall. This is an issue I have been engaging on. I went and sat under that bottom house and spoke with them. We agree on an approach. In agreeing on that approach, I said to them, this is the lawyer we'll get for you. I got a lawyer for them. They went to the lawyer, and some of them were to go back with information, and they never did until a jail came. So some of it, we have got to get our supporters to understand that on these legal matters, we need to act early. Because if you don't, what in essence happened is the government coming. For instance, in this case, I had said to them, look, you can't stop the acquisition, but you can get fair compensation. And we should have gone to court earlier to ensure that that matter is in the court and you get the requisite compensation. Because we know the government is discriminatory by nature. Now, there are some approaches that can be taken to stop the PPP in their tracks, but it's not the kind of approach you could discuss here.
Okay.
And I want to add another element here that Guyanese must bear in their heads. The PPP is paying endless persons around us. And you have to be very, very careful in who you engage, how you engage them, because of the nature of the PPP at this stage. And mind you, I went with the marketing. I was right there with the thing hovering over your head. And so, but we have got to understand one of the things that happened that is unfortunate was that, particularly after we liberalized the economy in 1989, we were not doing the level of political education and the political consciousness that existed in that era doesn't exist now. You're now trying to rebuild it by your programs, your program, Paul's slow program, what we are doing. It's a process of building political consciousness. So I do accept that there are brutal images to watch. You've been exposing them internationally and otherwise. But a wild response will not do us any good. A proper, well-orchestrated response based on the organization of people on the ground is what is needed at this stage.
Is what is needed at this stage. Aubrey, I have to press you on another complex issue. The PNC is first and foremost an electoral party. And an electoral party in a multi-ethnic society always has to walk a very thin line in terms of representation of his ethnic base without alienating other ethnicities. It's always a fine line. I myself have been quite critical of the PNC over the years of not dealing frontally with the issue of discrimination of African Guyanese. Because that discrimination, as we have now learned, given the technology and give more information at our disposal, is both institutional in the sense that the discrimination is part of the way in which our institutions have evolved since emancipation. But part of it, as we are now seeing under this PPP, is intentional as part of the PPP's strategy of governance, that discrimination against African Guyanese is part of its strategy. So we have the institutionalized discrimination, and then we have the intentional political discrimination. And the language of the PNC has not changed generally. You, I think, dealt with it in a new way last week or week before the last, when you were asked about the boycott in Brooklyn, and you took the opportunity to deal with the ethnic question in what I call a new way. But I still, most of the leaders of the PNC are still, I think, clumsy when it comes to dealing with ethnic questions. My point here is that there are issues that are germane and particular to African Guyanese. There are issues that are germane and particular to Amerindians. There are issues that are particular and germane to Indian Guyanese. And I think trying to lump them all together, in a sense, you end up not dealing with these questions effectively. And the African Guyanese question is most urgent because they make up the majority of your support base. And they're clearly, everybody, the United Nations, the Americans, they have now concluded that the PPP is intentionally targeting African Guyanese. Is it time for the PNC, as you said, this is a new dispensation, is a new era. Is it not time that the PNC, as a party, adjust its rhetoric when it comes to dealing with ethnic questions to deal with the present situation?
I think we have adjusted our language. In fact, I recall meeting members of parliament and other persons in the party, and we did agree that when we speak, we will speak about ethnic and political discrimination. The reason being, we know that there is discrimination against African Guyanese based on ethnicity. But then the indigenous Amerindians, the Indo-Guyanese, When they are supportive of us, there's discrimination. So it's political discrimination. I've also been, look, let us not make this thing simple, Black Indian, Amerindian. It's far more complex. It also, and I've been saying, it has a class nature. The coming of oil wealth and the greed of the PPP have resulted in a situation where more than 90% of the resources are going to the PPP elite family, friends, and favorites. What that does is create conditions for about 80 to 90% of the society to feel excluded and therefore could be engaged based on a class basis rather than an ethnic basis. If one accepts that in politics, you have to build alliances to achieve your objective. Remember, we are no longer in a situation where the PPP or the Indo-Guyanese 49% of the population, so they probably need 2% to get press. We're in a situation where there's 39.1% Indo-Guyanese, 29% African Guyanese. The combination of the two, or the two by themselves, can't get over the line. So the change in demographics in recent times open new vistas for you to, while exposing the discrimination against African Guyanese, to build alliances with other ethnic groups to achieve your objectives. I was in Region 9, and it was so evident that the indigenous people are being neglected. And so we formulated an approach to the indigenous communities, sold it to them, and we have been doing extremely well in those areas. Of course, the PP gone after telling all the lies, etc. This politics is no longer a straightforward African versus Indo. That politics is dead. The politics you have to look at this stage, the big picture of us having oil resources. Yes, we acknowledge the discrimination against African Guyanese and we will fight it. But there are also problems with the Indo-Guyanese community and the indigenous community. We have now got to have strategies, and that is why we are also speaking about a people-centered development strategy. And notice, I do not talk about equality, I talk about equity. Because equity will allow us to deal with the imbalances in the society in a way which equality wouldn't. And so, in this new political landscape, one has to build alliances with all ethnic groups, while not losing focus on the discrimination against African Guyanese and the discrimination against Indo and indigenous who are not PPP. You did say we are an electoral party. And I have no doubt that we are an electoral party. And that in all of our focus, or most of our focus, we have to look at winning an election. But we also have to look at the inequities in the society, which will put us in the areas of race. A lot of times people in dealing with inequities just focus on Indo and Afro. But I think the Amerindians feel the blunt of these inequities. And so to talk about changing it and organizing for changing it is also dealing with the ethnic issue, while at the same time not alienating different ethnic groups. And so a lot of times people talk, but I spend a lot of time engaging experienced people, talking with them, and we continuously analyze the political situation to understand it. You know, I would engage you on these issues. We will always agree, I have said the WPA approach will always be different to us. They have a different evolution. Our approach will be different to the PPP. We all have different evolutions. But in opposition, we have got to build these alliances. But you see, if you see it only as to get political power, then you're in trouble. Because after you get political power, you wouldn't have the mechanism to deal with the issue. I seen it as political power to me is a means towards an end. It's the means that we will use to bring everybody together to develop programs and projects that will allow us to challenge this race issue and ensure a society in which a wider cross-section of the people of Guyana are benefiting. And that is why when the election comes and we put out our people-centered development strategy, you will take, for instance, let me call one that we would have mentioned, rent-to-own. A rent-to-own program will help to deal with the race issue because you will be taking Guyanese of all ethnicity and building houses for them, which they will pay rent for, and at the end of the process, they own the house. Now, we have to look at the post-election coalition. How do we involve the political parties, accommodate their approach? There are different approaches to us, our approach, and some new approaches. So I'm saying to you, one has to analyze the situation, look at how you will achieve political power, but also configure how you're going to maintain the alliance past elections and transform it into a national program that allows us to transcend race, ethnicity, and those things. All of those factors have got to be considered. Even religion will have to play a role. How do we deal with the religious community? How would we deal with the advent of rights for gays, etc.? All of these are issues that, if not handled properly, can become dividing tools rather than tools of unifying the society. And our intention has to be unifying the society. But if you accept that even as you unify, you create divisions, you also will now have to put mechanisms in place to attenuate the divisions that would have come from your success.
That would have come from your success, opposition leader Aubrey Norton. Aubrey, you've taken the conversation to multi-ethnic approach, class approach, and so forth. And I want to ask your position, your view on two concrete proposals. One is old, and you've been involved in it. And that is the whole notion of shared governance. If there is one outcome that is going to ensure that all our ethnicities are part and parcel of the process of governance, shared governance is it. But since that period under Oit and to some extent under Corbyn, the PNC has waffled on this question of shared governance. And I want to get your take on it here tonight. And the second issue is one that I am biased towards, and that is the Thomas proposal for cash transfers, taking 10% of the oil revenue and giving it directly to families, and that all families, all 210, 220 households will get an equal share of that 10%. Again, your party has waffled on that issue. And I think both of those issues go to the core of a national multi-ethnic policy. Can you clear up where the PPP stands on those two issues?
You mean the PNC?
The PNC, sorry.
Let me start with the last one.
Yes.
I don't think I have waffled on this issue.
No, I didn't say you. I said your party.
The PNC, as far as I am aware, have no problem whatsoever with direct transfers. We might differ on the amount and how we do it. But I do believe that there are two things I am convinced of. One, actual transfers that make sense to the people of Guyana. We do an analysis of the households, ensure we got the correct data so that we give it to households and give it in a fair way, not in the way the PPP does transfer. One time is household, one time is house ownership based on household. So I agree with that totally. Now, as an academic, I wrote on shared governance, you know that.
Yes.
I believe in shared governance, but I do not believe it's an event. It's a process. Now, the recent activities of the PPP raises questions, in my opinion, raise questions, in my opinion, of could the PPP be a good partner in shared governance? Shared governance, which comes from, you would know, theories of consociacism, really and truly assumes that the elites in the various political parties represent the ethnic constituency. First assumption. Second, it assumes that in representing those constituencies, you will be fair and those constituencies will be adequately represented. While I do believe that the PPP is a power broker in Guyana, what I'm not sure of is if the form of shared governance you develop is one that will succeed with PPP's politics of divisiveness, corruption, incompetence. That worries me. But I also believe that sometimes we restrict shared governance to horse trading ministers and ministries. In shared governance, you would know this, there is the theory of the weighted majority. And one of the things we can probably do is to say, look, to ensure no ethnic group dominates, you can bring a weighted majority to the budget, saying rather than 51%, 60%, which would mean you have to engage all the forces to arrive at the budget. Of course, you know, shared governance has the major problem of gridlock. But we must explore other options for shared governance, apart from just the sharing of cabinet ministries, etc. You can use weighted majority, like I just mentioned, to ensure the resources in the society are allocated fairly. That is one option that exists. And so, even though I'm a proponent of shared governance, I would prefer for us to sit and work out how we move forward in terms of shared governance. You're going to get it under the PPP. You have to defeat the PPP. But when you finish defeating the PPP, you will have to have the political will to do what is needed. Because let me say this to you. There are a lot of people who so badly want to see the back of the PPP. To talk about sharing government with them in itself is a problem. So you would need a period of dealing with those issues and creating the conditions for shared governance. And then I do not see myself involved in any shared governance with the likes of Jack Dale. There are people in the PPP who I think are reasonable that you could deal with. But Jack Dale cannot be, in my opinion, part of any system of shared governance in this country. The word shared and his name are contradictions. So I am very much in favor of shared governance, but I'm aware of the problems of its practicality and of gridlock. And as it relates to Dr. Thomas's position, I have no doubt it is one of the best positions. I did say to you that there are two things I hold. One is that the that the resources should go to the people. And the second one that I hold strongly and will do in government is that our oil resources should not be governed by the whims, caprices, and fancies of a Barajak or a Fanati. We need a petroleum commission that is well staffed, has professional people, etc., so that we make the best decisions for the oil sector. And that petroleum commission should not be in isolation. We also need a proper natural resource fund that allows us to spend on development, protecting future generations, and ensuring that there isn't the squandering of our resources. And so it is that kind of framework I am prepared to operate in as leader of the party and a government of the future.
Aubrey, we spoke about election. It keeps coming up in the conversation. But we know the electoral architecture is not conducive as it is right now to free and fair elections. We have the old problem of the voters list, all the stakeholders inside of Guyana, all the observers outside of Guyana have pointed to the broken electoral architecture, starting with the voters list, starting with all the anomalies that were uncovered at the recount. And so we have the question of voter people voting for other people when they're not there, voting impersonation and so forth. We have all the, you had the situation at the last local government election where you had to walk a thin line between going into an election with a broken electoral machinery and of course you hesitated because in going in with a broken machinery, you're in a sense giving in to rigging before it starts. The PPP is not budging on the question of a clean voters list. They're not budging on biometrics. Elections are coming. How do you deal with the dilemma that if you stay away from the election, the PPP wins everything? And if you go into the election, in a sense, you're going into an election that is not likely to be free and fair.
You know, I don't like the either approach to things. I like to let us look at all the variables.
Okay.
I wouldn't say the PPP isn't budging. Recently, Jabara Jagdeo said that they're going to remove the dead people on the list. Previously, we were saying nothing. I think it's a small movement, but it's a movement we must watch. We have been continuously engaging the international community because they themselves commit to these changes. And therefore, I think we need to continue to press for a clean voters list and biometrics in that order. Then you come now to if you don't get a clean voters list. There are always dangers in boycotting an election. If I'm going to boycott an election, it has to be stopped. There's no sense in you saying you're boycotting and they're going ahead with the election. So, when the local government elections were coming, of course, there was a team that we were strategizing. And we took a conscious decision that we will lure the PPP into complacency, let them believe we were not going, but we were doing on the work to go. We also made the decision that we're going to selective communities. We're not going to try and spend resources all across and spread yourself thin. Now, we went to those elections. I believe that those elections showed our capacity to beat the PPP because they had far more resources. the thing was they're going to take every APNU, AFC municipality, until which they didn't. But as we move forward, we have to continue to struggle for a clean voters list. But we have to begin to train our people to scrutinize the election if perchance we don't get a clean voters list. In politics, I do not believe in drawing a line in the sand unless you show when you don't draw the line in the sand, raining and fall, and the line gone. I hope I make that as explicit as I can. For me, politics is not something in which you draw a line on this in the sand until you are sure you're going to ensure the rain and fall and everybody see the line in the sand. If you draw the line in the sand and then the rain come and nobody see it, it ain't got no use for it. So I must say to you, very early in politics, I learned, do not draw a line in the sand. Now, having been around politics and studied the practice, anytime you don't go into an election and you allow your opponents to take every seat, you're going to be worse off. If we didn't go to the local government election, there would have been no question of whether the land that they given to the Qatari, they would have been the Georgetown City Council, and they would have just give it away. I'm just giving you one example of why it is important, even though to be that counterbalance. And so I'm saying to you, Burnham used to tell us, never say never. I'll end there.
You'll end there. Aubrey, time is moving on, but we have to get to the issue of the internal dynamics in the PNC. You all are preparing for Congress. Everybody knows the facts surrounding that. But people have been commenting on the engagement and interaction among the leadership. Brother Roysdale Ford has announced his candidacy, and he has been laying out his position, as is the case when there is competition in an internal election. Things get heated. I've heard people comment on what's happening in the PNC now, and I have to remind them that it's not new. Since Burnham died, for example, when Hoyt came in, Hoyt had a very strident opposition from Hamilton Green. Eventually, Hamilton Green was thrown out of the party and so forth. But you have to admit that what's been happening in the leadership contest in the PNC is a little bit disquieting for especially young people who are not au fait with the kind of white green thing that we that I made reference to. There are lots of criticisms of you, your style of leadership, your inability to excite the base, and all of those things. Are those criticisms justified, or are people making too much of these things?
Let me start with exciting the base. Everywhere I go with our base, this party is greeted and greeted properly. It is easy to people to say you don't excite the base. I said when I took over this party, a lot of people were saying they're not going to vote PNCR, they're not going to vote APNU. People are now saying they will vote APNU. People are coming forward and helping the party. So I don't know what they mean by exciting at the base. And I don't like the comparison between Hamilton Green and Hoyt. In this sense, Hamilton Green was a seasoned member of this party. who at the time was not doing anything to destroy the party. All that he was doing was being done on the inside of the party. Unfortunately, it ended the way that it did. This distinct difference with what is happening now. I campaigned in the last election against Joe Harmon. And at no stage did I make any negative comment about Joe Harmon. And the reason I did it was because after the election, I know we would have had to work together. We have some people who come now and are being, in my opinion, misled by people, and people are using their inexperience to put them out there in the way they are. I want to remind people that after the Congress in 2021, I felt that we had to bridge the gap, forge some unity. One of the first persons we co-opted to the executive was Roysdale Ford. I hope people remember that. And I'm saying this because from the inception, I sought to promote unity in the party. Unfortunately, there were some people who were going out to the party who were defeated, and they began to promote the division in the party. Now, it is disquieting to me. You said it is disquieting to you. But I've been around politics long enough to know that where there is inexperience, people use that inexperience to achieve their objectives. And what you see in front is not necessarily what is in front. In politics, you look to see who are behind the front actors to determine the nature of the action. I think we have done that. People in the PNC have been around politics long enough to read politics and understand what is happening. We are going to go to the Congress, we campaign, and in the end, the people in the party will make the decisions. They will elect a leadership that will move this party forward. I do not, and I also think that one of the things that affect the party, over the years, the party had a well-organized structure, which we have to put back. For instance, when I joined the PNC in 1972, I moved from YSM Group secretary to chairman, to the district, to the region, before I arrived at the national level. And so I had an understanding of the party, and you know what it is to sacrifice in the party. You understand the culture of the party. You now have a situation where people can come to the party. They become members of parliament, members of the executive, and they never even function at a group. And so the dangers of that is that you're having people who believe in their mind they understand the party and the culture, and they don't. I mean, I can give you a practical example that caused me to laugh. We had a barbecue, and there were some who said they contended. And right at this barbecue, there were key party activists and leaders in communities that they didn't know and didn't engage. And that comes because they haven't been as active in the party, coming up the ladder and learning the party system. For me, the most important thing right now is not those who talking about leadership, etc. The most important thing is for us to put back this party structure in place and ensure there is a mechanism by which party comrades learn politics from the ground up. This is not to say that people shouldn't come and arrive at leadership. Throughout the history of the party, there were persons who came in and ended up in the leadership, but they took the time to learn the party. And the things they didn't learn, they weren't wild about. They would consult, understand, and move forward. I believe there are some young people in this party who were not in the party before they become MPs. But with time, they will emerge as good political persons. But force ripe in anything don't necessarily be the best.
Force right. Aubrey, we have gone for an hour and a half, and it's always a pleasure to have you here. There is never enough time to deal with a lot of the concrete issues in the time that we have allotted to us. As you notice, I dealt with general issues today. I didn't get into things like the teacher strike and so on and so forth. We'll have to have you back to deal with those issues, those concrete issues. But in closing, your closing remarks, I want you to just tell us how your campaign is going, and by campaign I mean campaign for leader of the party, how the campaign is going, and whatever information you want to give to the public in that regard.
Let me start by saying I have no campaign to be leader that starts now. From the time I became a leader, I was all over this country, meeting party comrades, meeting people. I was always in continuous campaign mode. And even before that, even before 2021, when I became leader, I was always out there working with party people, being with them, so that when the time comes for election, me ain't gotta go and criticize nobody, lie on nobody. My record on the ground with party comrades will speak for itself. The things we have done at the level of this secretariat, improving our public relations, and all of those things will. You only have to fabricate and to be critical of things that probably don't even exist. If you parachute in and didn't have the kind of history and doing the kind of work that should be done. I am satisfied that I have been working in this party. I've been involved in this party. The party membership sees me as somebody that they can approach and engage. Of course, there are things that some party comrades are critical of me. And I can give you one example, and this is an internal one. Before, when we have things like General Council, there used to be special meals for the leadership. And when I became leader, I cut it out. I said we must cook food for everybody. And if the membership could eat it, the leadership must. And so we no longer have this situation where you specifically, because look, if you're a party, you want to treat everybody well, regardless of where they find themselves in the structure. And what I would say in closing is this. We have brought the People's National Congress a far way. We have engaged the base of the People's National Congress, and the base of the People's National Congress is with us. Many, when we started the local government election, didn't participate. And I'm telling you about people who are in leadership positions. But once they see the people start to turn out and respond, they came and joined. I think they will join and we'll carry this party forward and be successful first at the Congress and finally in the country by taking the leadership from the People's Progressive Party. That is my final message.
Thank you very much, Aubrey. It's always good to have you here to
And you and I am always disposed to engage.
yes. And as I said, treat this as part one of the interview. There are other concrete things we didn't get into. The details of the overseas work. You've been spending a lot of time, comparatively speaking, engaging overseas. We haven't talked about things like the teacher strike and some of the current issue, the recent case of.
I can check and come back a day next week.
But please do. Please do. Please do. You
I
heard
will
it
check
here.
and see when I'm available, and I'll come a day next week.
Okay. Thank you very much, my brother.
Thanks for having me, and good evening to your viewing and listening audience. All right.
And I want to thank you, the audience. I know on a lot of these issues you all are divided, but that's what the whole concourse of ideas are about. That's what the indigenous democratic process is. And note I say indigenous, because sometimes when we talk about democracy, we talk about other people's definition of democracy. But I would like to think about an indigenous form of democracy. And what that means is that people agree and disagree very strongly. We're going to have Norton back here sometime next week, as he said, and we're going to get into some of the nitty-gritty concrete issues that we didn't get to touch tonight. Tomorrow night, Coretta McDonald is going to be here. The things are moving. Things are moving. The government has said it's now moving to not arbitration yet. They are moving towards some form of talking, the trade union word that they use for it. The government has written the Ministry of Education. They've written the Ministry of Labor, and they are engaging. The teacher union was in there today, and they're engaging. So tomorrow night, we would have more because Coretta McDonald is going to be here. And by the time tomorrow night, hopefully the situation would have moved a long way from today. Thank you all again for staying with us tonight. And I will see you all tomorrow night, same time, same place.